Welcome to the Practically Speaking Mom podcast, your place for intentional moms to build strong families. Today, Val gives you a glimpse into her why and how of educating her family at home for the past 24 years. This is often referred to as homeschooling, but in this episode, Val explains why she prefers to frame this idea in a different context. She also answers questions like, how does homeschooling differ from other education formats? What are the pros and cons of homeschooling? How can I manage my toddlers while leading the schooling of my older children? What should my homeschooling schedule look like? And how can I help my children achieve mastery of their different subjects? No matter what education option you choose, in today's episode you will find some helpful ideas for your child's academic journey.
Doesn't it feel like we are constantly making difficult decisions about our kids' lives? We wrestle with each choice. We stress, we pray. We just so badly want to choose well in our parenting. Where your kids go to school and what type of school setting is just one of the many ways that you strive to do what's best for your child. I want you to know, before I dive into this topic of why I homeschool and how I homeschool, I want you to know that the decision is difficult enough regarding my own kids, so I by no means in any way ever spend my time judging the school choices you are making. None of us are cookie-cutter families. We all are unique masterpiece families designed by God with unique plans and purposes. We're not going to all have the same decision here. It's okay for you and I to not choose the same option for our families in lots of areas, including school choice. That being said, I get a lot of questions regarding why and how I homeschool, so I decided to give it some attention on the Practically Speaking Mom podcast in hopes that I can answer these questions and give you a little peek into my mind and heart on the topic for my family. So I've been homeschooling. This will be my 24th year. And there's two main things that make homeschool different from other options. Not that I technically like the word homeschool. It kind of misrepresents what's really going on with quote-unquote homeschooling. It's just the term that is used all over, so it's the term that keeps getting used. But it really doesn't necessarily represent what we do with what I call parent-directed education. I'm making the choices, but I'm not necessarily the only teacher. It's not necessarily all happening at home, that's for sure. So parent-directed education would probably be a better word than homeschooling, but nevertheless, I will use homeschooling as my word because that is what all of you guys are familiar with. So there are basically two things that make homeschooling different from other options. The first one is what I just said, parent-directed versus administration-directed schooling. So what decisions are parent-directed versus administration-directed? Well, time is one of them. How is the time spent for the student? 2, content. What content are they being taught, or what content are they being exposed to, learning about, reviewing, studying, testing on, that kind of thing. So time, content, and 3rd, social settings or social interactions. And the other main difference is variety versus singular. So in parent-directed education, it tends to be a great wide variety of time, content, social settings versus group school or administration-directed school, which tends to be a singular setting and a singular peer group or social experience and singular content. Like there's a few companies for curriculum that is generally chosen in a given school district, and they stick with that. And then singular age group. Those kids are in an environment with their age group or a peer group most of the time. And therefore, we're looking at parent-directed variety education versus administration-directed singular education choice. So that's kind of a summary from my perspective of the difference between the two. Now, you could say that my philosophy would be full immersion living school, as in we look at books, but we also really try to live out the experiences, get hands-on with things more than just a textbook and tests. It's a different approach. So everybody's homeschool is different. Some homeschools do stick with texts and tests only. Some do online or, a very screen-based education, which is kind of what public schools are also going to a lot of. There's also a classical method, which I lean towards. The classical method is kind of cool because what you're looking at is how a child's mind develops over time, and that in the very young years, they memorize so well. So usually you're going to see in classical education that there's going to be a lot of little memory songs. And I have definitely incorporated that into my education system at home. So classical model is that they memorize really well in the early years, and then they apply what they know in very concrete, more simple, basic ways to apply them, this information. And then they grow into a place where they're ready to debate and they're ready to apply concepts in very abstract and unusual and unexpected ways. And so that's the classical model of education. And I love, love, love memory songs for little kids. That's why I'm all about cross7.org, which I have mentioned several times on here. Let's jump into how do I homeschool? And from that, you will hear more of my philosophies. If I were giving advice to someone who's considering homeschooling right now, I would say to you, identify the pros and cons to you. And if you've decided, I'm going to do this, then take that list of cons and you turn them into pros. We can do that. For example, the aspect of, what you hear so much from people is, but what about socialization? Which I personally feel like my kids are able to get so much more variety of different ages of people interaction and different settings of people interaction, more demographic diversity in people interaction from not being limited to one school setting. But that would be an example of how you take something that appears to be a con and you shape that. You determine, how can I make this an area that actually is a big pro for our choice in homeschooling? So that is an example of parent-directed education. Okay, is that we get to shape that and affect that. So if you're a homeschooler, you need to do this. You need to make that list of pros and cons, and you turn those cons into pros, okay? Now let's take a quick minute on, here's another question that I get is, what do you do with all the littles when you need to have some more, the older they get, the more complex and all that kind of material they need to be learning. So how in the world do you handle both? And I want to give you just I'm going to give you 7 tips for what to do with the littles, okay? The first one is that you start by making a schedule based on your youngest one's schedule first. Now, schedule making is going to be a big part of this. In fact, I am going to talk about the pros and cons of whether even to have a schedule. I'll do that next. But let's look at this. And that is, I'm going to make a schedule about my little. When do they nap? When do they need to eat? Secondly, incorporated into that schedule is I want to set a timer to fill their love bucket for 5 minutes at the top of every hour. I know that sounds like I'm being really clinical, but the truth is that the younger they are, the quicker they deplete in their love bucket. And so we need to be sure we are scheduling in lots of filling of that. And so the top of the hour just worked well for me. Thirdly, schedule an activity for them that comes next. So you've got 5 minutes of really focused, just loving on them. And then 15 minutes where they are doing a more detailed activity. And I've got a whole bunch of these in my book, When Littles Are Loud, Maximizing the Moments Without Drowning in Chaos. And in that book, the whole book is actually about how to schedule your kids, your little ones, day in a way that increases their independence, that increases their different aspects of mental growth and learning. And so when I'm scheduling 15 minutes every hour of more detailed time for them based on their age, age appropriate for each developmental thing. When I'm spending 15 minutes on that, that is not necessarily I'm interacting with them all 15 minutes. It means I am putting in front of them a different aspect of their development, things that would be effective for that, okay? And I'm putting thought into that at the beginning of the school year, and you don't have to do that alone. My book can help you do that, okay? It's actually much more simple than it may sound. Number 4, have some school supplies handy for them because they just love to feel like they're a big kid doing school too. So just have some supplies handy for them. So when they say, I want to too, then so you can say, great, and pull out their supplies, and they're going to be, disinterested in a few minutes, possibly. Maybe they'll stick with it longer, and that's fine. But if not, it's great that they just go off and, toddle off to a different interest of theirs. They didn't get shooed away from school that way. They were embraced in, yes, that would be awesome if you want to do that. So have some school supplies handy for them to make them feel like they're fitting in with the olders. And number 5, schedule the most tedious subjects that you need to teach your older kids. Schedule that during the little ones, either nap time or music time. And music time is a great learning time for those littles that they need. It's time that mama's not very involved because they need to learn some independent play. And so they're playing in a confined spot that is safe for them, listening to learning music while they are given a limited amount of toys because you don't want to generate chaos and short attention spans in them. And so giving them like 3 toys for this designated music time can be really helpful in developing a whole lot of things in them, but it's pretty hands-off by you as mom, and therefore you are free to help that older one with some more tedious things. All right, next, number 6, teach them to listen the first time. This, of course, is important for every kiddo, not just homeschooled ones, but it's very critical if you're going to be in charge of the education of your children, that you have learned how to make sure they do things. And so go back and listen to some of my podcasts on getting kids to listen the first time and how to follow through and follow up with them on things. And so I will put some links in the show notes for that. And number 7, this is in a list of things to do with littles when you're trying to teach homeschooling, but honestly, it's effective stuff for every little, no matter whether the mama is trying to homeschool or not. It's number 7, equip them with the habit of happiness. I know that sounds, what? You mean I'm going to dictate that they act happy all the time? I'm not saying that, but I am saying that there are patterns that we can affect in our kids' moods that can actually help them experience a more joyful life, okay? And I want to do that literally so that they can enjoy life better by not being bent on unhappiness and displeasure. And so you can go back. I'll put a link to an episode that I have about that as well. The next thing that I want to talk to you about is, should I make a schedule for my homeschool or not? This has been my philosophy. To schedule or not to schedule, that's the question that we're looking at for a minute. So here's what I found when I would try no schedule. 1, we didn't have a sense of accomplishment because we didn't know if we had done enough that day. 2, it was harder to motivate myself or my kids to do the hard things, and the hard things tend to be the exact things that bring the most growth and make the most memories. Number 3, without a schedule, our days seemed full of chaos, and we couldn't identify the important from the necessary. And so a schedule helped me do that. And then finally, not having a schedule seemed to foster an undisciplined lifestyle, and I did not want that for my kiddos. I wanted them to learn to be self-disciplined. And obviously that comes from starting out with us as a family living a disciplined life, and then helping to equip them to be self-disciplined through that process. They're not going to learn self-discipline if they haven't experienced a disciplined lifestyle. And when I speak of that, I am not speaking about punishment, okay? I am talking about what actual discipline is meant to do, which is to bring order. This is a conversation about how I as a person can bring order to my life. I do that through different aspects of self-discipline. And so if I can bring some discipline to a home, if I can help us live a lifestyle that is some self-regulation happening as a family unit, then as an individual, they've already experienced it. Now I just need to equip them for how to achieve that on their own as well. So I learned to keep a schedule, but to see it as a goal and a guide for each day, not a dictator. My schedule aligns with the priorities we have set for our family to thrive. So my schedule is a goal and a guide. It is not a dictator. And this is one of the differences of parent-directed education versus administration-directed education, is that I can look at a day and I can say things like, Grandma and Grandpa are visiting. Grandma and Grandpa are not visiting right now, but I'm just giving you a scenario here that Grandma and Grandpa are visiting. So while they're here, I'm going to think about ahead of time, what are their giftings and their passions and their skill sets? I'm going to have them teaching my kids some of those while they're around instead of our regular schoolwork. Maybe I'm just going to pare us down to just only math and language for the week while they're here, so that we can instead focus on learning some of the skills that Grandma and Grandpa know about and that Grandma and Grandpa are passionate about, and have us tell us some stories from their time period of growing up. This is going to be great learning. And this is what I would call that lifestyle of immersion living versus just spending my time in a book and neglecting Grandma and Grandpa, or saying, sorry, we have school, so we can't spend time with you. Guess what? Spending time with Grandma and Grandpa, there's probably some things, depending on the Grandma and Grandpa, that we can learn from them. And the learning will be so much richer because the parent decided to direct education in a different kind of way this week. So that would be an example of a schedule is a guide and a goal, but it is not a dictator in our life. All right, let's move on to the next thing. If you homeschool, you might want to pick up my online resource. It's called Homeschooling in Real Life, and it goes over all the different aspects of how we do school, such as and including schedule making and record keeping. And so something I want to say at this spot in this conversation is that I start teaching my kids to control their time and to check off their lists throughout the day, their school checklist, and to keep records of the work that they are doing throughout the day. I have my eyes on it, and I am equipping them to do this. But what this does is, by the time they reach college, they are so used to overseeing and having habits of directing their time and keeping track of, I've got this due in 2 weeks. How am I going to map this out to make sure I get all the steps done before I get there? They have been so used to doing that before they get to college that it is a quite smooth transaction for them to enter college because of focusing on them keeping a schedule and record and planning that is all incorporated into my homeschool system. So Homeschool Mamas, a syllabus that comes with your textbook for history, for example. Make a copy of that. And as the child completes each day, they can write the date in there and they can check off or highlight each little thing as it gets done. And so they are so used to tracking all of their responsibilities in a given subject that way. But if you get my online resource, I think it's only like $5 or $8. Homeschooling in Real Life covers a lot of things. Let's see what all it covers. Simplifying schedules, records, and curriculum, saving time and keeping your sanity, making a checklist to increase accountability and responsibility, finding your learning spots in your home, determining your priorities and implementing them into your days, character development and success habits, curriculum choices and combining ages, and like taking one curriculum and teaching it to multiple ages, a partnership between parent and student, and math success tips are all in my online resource on my website. So go to practicallyspeakingmom.com, click on my store or shop. I can't remember which it's called right now. And then scroll down to Homeschooling in Real Life, and you will see a picture of a little girl with white glasses on, in a school set, like with some school books beside her. So click on that to be able to download that resource. And one of the things it will show you is my checklists for them and how I have them learn to keep track of their record keeping and syllabuses and stuff. The next thing that I want to mention, and this is just huge. This is a huge difference to me of why I choose homeschooling. And that is the concept of mastering a concept before you move on. Now, this is critical in math and language skills, but especially math. Let's just look at, okay, this is how I grew up with math class. I go to the class, I hear the teacher's lecture, I do the assignment, I turn in the assignment. I'm going to get my grades back the next day, maybe a couple days later. Now, I cared about my grades, so I would look at what I missed. And sometimes, if I had time, and if I really cared about the grade and I really didn't understand why I missed something, then I would go and ask my teacher, why did I miss this? Help me understand. But most of the good kids would just look at what they missed and move on. They wouldn't actually figure out, why did I miss this? And then the kids that cared less than that about their grades, they wouldn't even really look at the ones that they missed at all. So that was typical. But what I wanted for my kids to experience was I want them to immediately know if they miss something, because if they get a problem wrong, I don't want them to retain the wrong process or the wrong fact in their mind, thinking it's correct. And then they move on, continuing to make wrong assignment decisions based on the wrong information that's in their head. Okay. So instead, it's real important to me. They do an assignment. They come to me. I have the answer key in front of me. They have their paper in front of them, and they will read the question and they will read the answer, and I will tell them whether it's right or wrong. And they've got a red pen in their hand, and so they're marking things as they go. Now, this means that they just heard the question and the answer right here. So if they were right, they just reviewed their information again. If they were wrong, they found out right then that it was incorrect. So then we progress through the assignment. At the end of the assignment, we go back and we look at the ones that they missed. And it depends on, how that assignment goes. If they do let's say they miss a whole bunch in the assignment, then that tells me this child does definitely not know the concepts here, and we have got some more work to do here. You see, the checking process is kind of the beginning of the education process, because it is what tells us what we know and what we don't know. So where in other settings, this is where the education process would end in a given concept. It's where it begins. At my house, I don't know if every homeschool setting is like that or does like that, but that's how I do it, because I want mastery at every step. So if they missed a whole bunch, I'm like, whoa, we definitely got to go over this whole concept together. If they miss one or two, then I'm going to say, redo these problems a second time and see if you get the right answer the second time. And then we'll go from there to see, why did you get the wrong answer the first time you did it? What was the missing link there? Did you write something down incorrectly? Did you compute something incorrectly? Did you read it wrong to me because your handwriting was poor? Let's identify what caused the problem there. And also, when you come back to me that second time, you are going to teach the concept to me. So if you can't teach the concept to me that we learned today, then that means you don't know the concept well enough, and we need to work on this some more. So that is what I would call concept mastery that should happen for sure in math. And language is another subject that really builds on your knowledge, builds on another and another and another. A little less so history and science aren't quite as much like that, because a lot of the concepts in science are very separate from other concepts. You can do great at biology and not great at chemistry. Some of those concepts are relatively mutually exclusive, but nevertheless, in general, I focus on mastery in all the subjects. That's why a lot of times if you ask a homeschooler, so what grade are you in? And they're like, well, in language, I'm in 6th grade material, and in math, I'm in 8th grade material, and in science, it's because we're progressing them at a mastery approach instead of a timeline of, we're going to get through this to this point, no matter how they're doing it or not. So it's just a different approach and concept. So that is just another difference between parent-directed versus administration-directed education options. Okay, well, that gave you a little taste of how we homeschool. There's so much more, so I hope to bring more of it to you soon. If you want more, you can ask me questions. Val@practicallyspeakingmom.com. Jump on the Facebook group, Intentional Mom Strong Family, ask questions there. Or I would love it if you would see all of my info in my Homeschooling in Real Life Simple Systems for Homeschool Success. That is available on my website. And I am going to do another episode, and it is going to be specifically about helping our high school kids get into college. What are some different tips and tricks for that? So some of that will be homeschool specific, and some of it is going to apply whether you homeschool or not. But I will continue this talk of how and why do I homeschool in high school, and what are some key things to do to really get you going in the college options that you want. Lots of little tricks that I have for you for that. Talking about different ACT stuff and scholarships and debt and just all kinds of things. So that's a few of the concepts we'll cover when we go over the next sort of homeschool topic. But whether you homeschool or not, you should listen to that upcoming episode. If you have kids in middle school or older, then it's going to be very applicable to you.
If you're interested in having Val Harrison, the Practically Speaking Mom, come to your next mom's event, retreat, or parenting seminar, you can email her at val@practicallyspeakingmom.com or go to her website, practicallyspeakingmom.com. Some of her most popular topics are feasting with the Father when you feel like a frazzled mama, your love becomes their strength, answering the 6 questions of your child's heart, wearing all your hats without wearing out, finding focus for your family to be the masterpiece family God intended, when littles are loud, maximizing the moments without drowning in chaos. Or if you'd like to host a marriage event or retreat, Val and I speak on the topic of love becomes strength, answering the 6 questions of your spouse's heart. Val counts it a blessing to be able to minister to you every week here on the Practically Speaking Mom podcast, the place for intentional moms to build strong families. Join her again right here next week for more encouragement and hope.